Shabbat Shalom Yesharala. First and foremost, I give all praises and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rucha Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to those like Akim that's preach the word in all truth and sincerity, along with the Israelite foreign brothers that are like the heathens. But the line of outside goes back to the nation of Israel, which nation of Israel are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans through the prophecies and curses of Deuteronomy 28 chapter and throughout the Bible. This is Brother Yakal. I'm my part of the video, and today's video will be entitled "No One of These Shall Fail." I'm just gonna go on some precepts, and Lord willing, you brothers and you sisters out there be edified through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'ashim Shai. You know, and I'm gonna start off in the book of Isaiah, chapter 34 and verse 16, and it reads, "Seek ye out the book of the Lord Yahweh and read," and that's right, and that's the standard you're supposed to live by, being in this faith, is not only teaching the gospel and going on the highways and byways, but also reading, you know, because very important that we, have to go back and read the, read about the accounts of our forefathers, of our righteous forefathers, and apply them to our life, you know. But that's very important. Is seek ye out the book of the Lord Yahweh, which is the Bible. Book of the Lord is the Bible, and read. It says, "No one of these shall fail." Talking about the prophecies. Because that's how we have faith in Yahweh by Shemon Shai and believing in what's written and knowing that it will come to pass, man. The Lord's prophecies, all the Lord's prophecies will come to pass. It says, "None shall want her mate," meaning no other book can match with the Bible, mate with the Bible. Because the Bible alone reigns supreme. Because the Bible deals with prophecy and all these other books that man man wrote. Such as the Quran. The Kibber the Book of Mormons. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, so on and so forth. All those books, doesn't deal with prophecy. You know, it says, "For my mouth it had commanded, and his spirit it have gathered them." Gathered the elect. Because there's truth. Yahweh Bashimo Shah is gathering his elect through his word. As it says in Baruch 4 and 37 in the Apocrypha. This is Baruch 4, verse 37. It's the KJV version. And it reads, "Lo, thy sons come, whom thou sentest away. They come gathered together from the east to the west by the word of the Holy One, rejoicing in the glory of Yahweh." Right, so that's how the elect in the last days will be gathered, through the word of the Holy One, through this gospel being preached out, because our apostle is a great millstone, they began on with Apostle Tahar. They had labored diligently for years, man, even before the YouTube era, before the 2000s, Apostle Tahar, with Apostle Tahar, he been teaching since the 80s, you know. So a lot of labor has went into this word, man, being preached. And it all started with Abba Bivens, which was Elijah the prophet coming back in the reincarnation, you know. But that's how the elect will be gathered through this word, But the point I want to really emphasize on was no one of these shall fail. I'm talking about the Lord's prophecies, man. Because as it says in Hebrews 6 and verse 18, that by two immutable things in which it was impossible for Yahweh to lie. So it's impossible for the Lord to lie. So the Lord, um, revealing his secrets and mysteries to his servants and prophets, which are the prophecies, that they will be fulfilled in the earth. The Lord is it's impossible for Yahweh to lie. So we know by this scripture alone that every word is gonna come, every word of the Lord gonna come to pass. It says we might have a strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. You know, yeah. So point I want to get was in which it was impossible for God to lie, for Yahweh to lie. Because it says in Isaiah 55:11, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return to me void. So the Lord's prophecies is not going to return to him void. And when you go into the word void, it's from the Hebrew word warrior quam, which means vainly, emptily, without effect. Yeah, so the Lord's word is not going to be without effect, you know. And the fact that we see earthquakes, the Lower Midwestern Code, a lot of crime happening, a lot of people deleting each other, those two prophecies alone that the Lord Yahweh Shai prophesied, that shows you right there that, the word of the Lord doesn't go out void, you know. And the major prophecy that we're waiting on is the MOTB technology, which is already here, but the elites, they want a perfect chaotic event to happen to the point they will be justified in making the MOTB mandated in America and throughout the whole world and pushing it because that is their new world order, to see it the whole population, you know. Um, but it says, um, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. And we know the Lord sent his prophecies in the earth, and the Lord will how this world will go out is through his prophets, because the Lord speaks through his prophets. Hosea 12:10. I have also spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. Yes, so the Lord, he speaks through his prophets and he reveals the secrets and mysteries to his prophets so they can go out and preach his word, man. You know, because they preach the word, they give warning, to Israelites that, Jacob's trouble is coming, that World War III is coming, but also they teach about salvation, that, only, because only the elect is going to be saved of Israel. So they talk about salvation and how we're going to get up out of here is through via chariots, so-called UFOs. That's how Yahweh Shah is going to deliver his elect through the chariots. You know, talk about the kingdom is only coming for us. We're gonna receive spiritual power. We're gonna see the new bodies. We're gonna live for eternity. This is America is the last time we're gonna be in captivity. So those are all the good things. You know, but before we get to those good things, which is ultimately the kingdom of heaven, we gotta go through the straight and narrow passage, man, which is Jacob's trouble, and only the elect is gonna endure and survive, man, and Lord willing will be a part of that. You know, this is in Sirach chapter 24 verse 32 in the Apocrypha. I will yet make doctrine to shine forth as the morning; it will send forth her light afar off. Yeah, so this doctrine, this word, is shining. And doctrine just means teachings. Doctrine um, it says right here, teaching a belief or set of beliefs held and taught by church, political party, or other group. You know, and one synonyms is teachings. So it's like Sirach 24:32. I'll yet make doctrine to shine as the morning, and will send forth her light afar off. Yeah, so this word has been sent forth afar off, because this doctrine is really from the heavens. These teachings that we have, the Apostle Elsgray Millstone doctrine, which is the doctrine of Yahweh Shemel Shai, this came from the heavens, literally. And it was revealed through to his service of prophets. And it began with Abba Bivens, which was Elijah the prophet coming back in the reincarnation, and then went all the way down to in today's day, to our apostles of the Great Millstone. They had their elders, High Priest Jaquab, High Priest Ariah, King Masha, and then to now, to our elders that taught us, to our apostles, elders of the Great Millstone. You know, it says, verse 33 says, "Oh, yeah, pour out doctrine as prophecy." So, this doctrine, these teachings, these true teachings that correlate with what the scriptures say, is prophecy, man. So, there's no way Esau is going to condemn this truth. There's no way the gates of hell going to prevail, as Yahweh Shai said, told Peter. The gates of hell, which are these Edomites, they're not going to prevail against this truth, man, because the house of David is back. And we know in the history, the house of David, they conquered the Edomites and other heathen nations. So same thing. It's gonna be the same thing in these times. These heathens, these Edomites, they're not gonna be able to overcome this truth, man. No matter how many sellouts of Jake they pay off to try to, you know, suppress this truth, there's gonna be nothing they can do to stop this knowledge, man. This doctrine going out. It says, and leave it to all ages forever. Yeah, so because this truth is old. you know, scriptures. This truth has, because it's prophecy. These prophecies were written long ago. And they were written by our forefathers of prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Hosea. You know, Habakkuk, Baruch. So on and so forth. So these prophecies are very old. They're ancient, but they're still relevant today because they're being fulfilled in today's time. So that shows you the power of the Lord, man, of the Lord's word, and His power alone. Habakkuk 2:14, "For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." So that's happening now. This knowledge of the Lord is being covered, is covering the whole earth. And that's why Esau's afraid, man. Because this is one thing Esau can't fight against. Because the weapons of our warfare are spiritual and not carnal. This is a spiritual battle, man. But it's gonna go into physical very soon. But when our physical battle comes, when Esau come down with great wrath, when he declare war on us, that's when the Lord's gonna lift up that standard for His elect. That's when the Lord's gonna defend His elect for His name's sake, man. With spirit, it's gonna give some of the elect spiritual power to defend themselves, or it's gonna deliver some of the elect through divine intervention through the angels. You know, so we got to win regardless. We got the we got the victory already. All we got to do is go through it, and Lord willing, we able to endure and make it to the end. So yeah, I just want to make a lesson on that. Don't one of these shall fail. Talking about the prophecies, that one prophecy of the Lord is gonna fail. They all gonna come to pass in their own set appointed time, and we have faith and believe in that wholeheartedly. So, Lord will, I was edified, and till next time, shalom.